When my father died, I believed the greatest challenge would be finding a way to exist in a world that no longer had him in it. I never imagined that the true heartbreak, the kind that steals your breath and changes who you are, would come from the very man I vowed to love forever. My name is Emma Caldwell. I'm 36 years old, and until recently, I thought I had a pretty blessed life. I was married to Tom, charming, polished, and the kind of man skilled at saying exactly what others wanted to hear. He made me believe in forever, or at least he made me want to believe. We met 8 years ago at a conference in Chicago. I was working in event marketing, coordinating the program down to the minute. He was the star speaker, confident, captivating, and warm, or so it seemed. He swept into my life wrapped in charisma, and I let him stay because it felt like fate. A week later, I was sitting across from my father at breakfast, retelling every detail. He listened, smiling the way only a proud dad can, and then his expression softened into something more cautious. "He sounds solid," he'd said, folding his newspaper. "But Emma, some people shine under stage lights and dim in real life." I laughed it off. I always did when Dad tried to protect me. He'd been both mother and father since Mom passed away when I was 20. He was my safe place, the brilliant mind behind Caldwell and West, the company he built from the ground up and grew into a $35 million enterprise. The man rarely misjudged character, but love has a way of making us blind. 2 years after that conference, Tom and I were married in a small ceremony surrounded by people who mattered. My father walked me down the aisle, tears in his eyes, pride radiating from every part of him. It was perfect, almost. Sitting in the front row, in a designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, was Tom's mother, Diane, a woman whose disapproval clung to her like expensive perfume. From the beginning, she made it clear I wasn't the daughter-in-law she had pictured. "She's nice," she whispered to Tom at the rehearsal dinner, her voice sharp enough to cut. "But she doesn't exactly look like CEO material." I tried. I really did. Flowers on Mother's Day. Invitations to family dinners. Effort after effort to show her I belonged. But Diane made sure I always felt like the wrong piece in her perfectly curated puzzle. And Tom. He brushed off her comments like they were quirks instead of insults. 6 years slipped by. My father's health began to fail, slow at first, then terrifyingly fast. Cancer doesn't care how badly you need more time. For months after the diagnosis, he left this world quietly in his sleep, and everything inside me cracked. I lost my only parent, my greatest supporter, my home. There is no preparation for that kind of grief. His funeral was elegant and dignified, exactly what he deserved. Tom helped here and there, though his mind always seemed elsewhere. Diane arrived late, hid behind oversized sunglasses, and slipped out before the final goodbye, as though even his death was an inconvenience to her. The morning after the funeral, I was still moving through the world like a ghost when my father's attorney called. His voice was gentle, the kind reserved for the grieving, and he asked if I could come to his office that afternoon. I didn't think much of it. I knew Dad had built a successful empire, but we never spoke about numbers. To me, his company was just a symbol of his hard work, not a fortune. I expected a modest inheritance. A home or two. Some savings. Enough, maybe, to one day step back from the grind. But when I sat in that sleek conference room, surrounded by leather-bound files and silent walls, reality hit like a punch. Everything was mine. Caldwell and West. The commercial properties. The investment accounts. The assets I didn't even know existed. After taxes, fees, and pending obligations, the estate was valued at just over $35 million. I remember gripping the armrests of my chair, terrified I might float away. My father had always been larger than life, but seeing it distilled into numbers made the loss feel sharper, crueler. He had left me his legacy, because he couldn't be here anymore. That night, legal documents were scattered across our coffee table like confetti after a party no one wanted to attend. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the pages until the words blurred. This wasn't a windfall. It was a tombstone made of dollar signs. Tom walked in from work, loosened his tie, and paused when he saw the paperwork. "So it's true," he said, giving a low whistle. "It's really all yours." I nodded, still numb. "Yeah. I didn't expect that." His grin stretched wide, too wide, and something in his eyes shifted. The warmth I once fell for flickered into something calculating. Well, he said, sitting beside me, we should probably talk about what to do with it. We could invest, buy that place in Aspen you liked. He paused, as if warming up to the real point. And of course, we'll need to decide how much to give Mom. My head snapped up. Give your mom, what? Tom looked at me as though I were being intentionally dense. Half, he said plainly. She's family. We give her half. For a second, I genuinely thought he was joking. A horrible, tasteless joke made at the worst possible time. But his expression remained cool and earnest, businesslike. My heart thudded painfully. Tom, this is my father's estate. Why would we give half to your mother? She and Dad barely knew each other. He wore a patient smile, the kind adults use on children who haven't yet learned how the world works. Emma, she raised me alone. She sacrificed so much, he explained, voice smooth as silk. This is our life now, and she's part of it. It's only fair. A hollow laugh escaped me, sharp, disbelieving, edged with fury. Not because any of this was amusing, but because the alternative was screaming. Your mother wasn't family to my father, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't hers. It isn't even yours. They were vultures, circling before I even realized there was something to feast on. Tom's request to hand over half of my father's legacy to his mother hung in the air like a rancid smell. I kept staring at him, waiting for a smirk, a laugh, anything that proved I misunderstood. But his eyes were cold, expectant. He meant every word. Tom, I said slowly, forcing calm into a voice that wanted to shake. My dad left this to me. Not to us, to me. This isn't some scratch-off jackpot. It's everything he worked his entire life for. Why would I give half of it to your mother? His jaw tightened. He leaned back, arms crossed like I was the irrational one in the room. Emma, stop being selfish. She's family. My family. I blinked hard. Exactly. Your family, not mine. She barely spoke to my father. She left the funeral before the last hymn was over. She hasn't even called to say she's sorry. Tom's expression hardened into something unfamiliar. That's just how she is. She's not emotional. But she cares. You think you're the only one suffering. What about my loss? Watching my wife turn into a greedy, entitled woman overnight. Greedy. The word landed like a slap, hot, humiliating, and cruel. I opened my mouth, then closed it again because there was nothing I could say that would make sense to a man who couldn't see how absurd he sounded. My father had been buried days ago, and this was what my husband chose to care about. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not visibly. Just a quiet fracture, the kind that destroys a foundation. I need air, I said, standing up before the walls closed in. As I walked away, I heard him mutter, unbelievable, like I was the one who'd betrayed him. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring into darkness, replaying every word, every tone, every red flag I had brushed aside over the years. It wasn't about the money. It was the entitlement. The disrespect. The way he treated my father's life's work like a winning ticket he'd been cheated out of. My dad always used to say, grief doesn't change people, it reveals them. God, he had been right. The next morning, Tom behaved as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, pecked my cheek, and chatted about weekend plans. I watched him, silent, a stranger wearing my husband's skin. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. Diane. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Her voice oozed through the speaker, sweetened like syrup, but too thick to swallow. Emma, darling, she purred. Tom told me the wonderful news. Such a blessing. Your father was a very smart man. There was a pause, calculated and heavy. I waited because I already knew what was coming. And I braced myself. I know this might feel a little awkward, Diane began, her voice dipped in artificial sweetness, but since you're coming into all that money now, I thought we could sit down and talk numbers. I have some ideas. Smart ideas. Investments, real estate, maybe a little place for myself. Nothing extravagant. Just something tasteful. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, feeling my pulse climb. You want to talk numbers, Diane? My voice came out low, tight. I buried my father less than a week ago. She clicked her tongue dismissively. Yes, and he would want you to take care of family. That's what good daughters and good wives do. Something inside me snapped so suddenly it almost felt like relief. Diane, I said, every word sharp and unshakably clear, with all due respect, you are not my family. You are not entitled to a single cent of this money. And the fact that you're asking right now, while I'm grieving, tells me everything I need to know about you. Silence. Then her voice returned, cold as winter ice. You've always believed you were better than us. Let's see how long that pride lasts when you're all alone, sweetheart. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, stunned, hands trembling so violently I almost dropped it. Her threat slithered under my skin, chilling and real. By dinner, Tom already knew. Of course he did. And he didn't even pretend to care how the conversation came about. You had no right to speak to my mother like that, he snapped the moment I walked into the kitchen. She had no right to ask for money, I shot back, trying to hold on to the last pieces of calm I had left. He raised his voice, the anger too familiar now. She's my only family. And I'm not going to let you treat her like garbage just because you hit the jackpot. I met his eyes, really looked at him, and saw nothing of the man I once loved. This isn't a jackpot, Tom, I said, voice breaking just slightly. It's a reminder that I no longer have a father. And instead of mourning with me, you and your mother are circling like predators waiting for a meal. He had no response. No apology. Just silence. And sometimes silence is the most honest answer of all. The days that followed only proved it further. Diane began showing up to our house without warning, breezing in like she owned the place. One afternoon she arrived carrying a glossy binder bursting with property listings. These would be perfect investments for us, she said as she spread them across my kitchen island, like we were business partners. Like she had a claim to anything my father built. Every visit, every comment, every entitled glance chipped away at the illusion I had once called marriage. And the second crack had become a canyon. Another day, Diane arrived with an interior designer trailing behind her, a woman armed with swatches, samples, and a smug little smile. They marched through my living room as if taking inventory of what would soon be theirs. Tom didn't stop them. He didn't even hesitate. She's just excited, he said later, waving off my anger. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic. I was watching the man I married dissolve into a stranger before my eyes, and somehow I was the one being unreasonable. The cracks in our marriage weren't cracks anymore. They were fault lines. I started protecting myself. I moved my father's documents into my office and installed a lock. I changed passwords. I transferred a portion of the inheritance into a secure, separate account no one else could access. And then I met privately with my father's attorney. I don't know exactly what I'm preparing for, I admitted, but I need to know my rights. He studied me with a somber look, the kind people use when delivering difficult truth. You're not the first person to walk in here after inheriting a fortune, he said. But most don't come with this level of caution. He paused. And none have asked about security cameras. My eyes widened. Cameras. The attorney leaned in, voice low and firm. I strongly suggest installing them immediately, especially if you're living with someone who believes they're entitled to half of everything. A chill slid through me. But I listened. 2 days later, proof arrived. I caught Diane rifling through my desk drawers, bold, unbothered, searching with intention. Papers were shuffled, envelopes flipped, labels scrutinized. She wasn't after a pen. When I stepped into the doorway, she didn't even startle. Oh, Emma, she said breezily, as though we were sharing a harmless moment. I was just looking for a notepad. Tom mentioned you keep extras in here. Her hand rested casually, too casually, near the locked file drawer where I kept the estate documents. My pulse hammered, but my voice stayed level. Next time you need something, I said, you ask. A thin, smug smile curved her lips. Of course, dear. As soon as she left, I relocked the drawer and pulled up the camera footage on my phone. There it was, undeniable. Her rummaging with purpose. Hunting. And I knew exactly what she wanted. That night, I confronted Tom. Your mother was in my office today, I said, holding his gaze. She was trying to find the inheritance paperwork. He didn't even look surprised. She was curious, he said flatly. It's a lot of money, Emma. People get curious. She had no right, I shot back, anger rising hot in my chest. He sighed, deep, theatrical, and rubbed his temples as if I were the source of his suffering. You're being paranoid. Paranoid. Another word that cuts deeper when spoken by someone who claims to love you. I stared at him, really looked, and realized something chilling. I was no longer living with a husband. I was living with a threat. It's not like she stole anything, I said sharply, anger rising like heat. She doesn't need to steal it. She's trying to manipulate us into giving it to her. Tom rose from his chair, his expression hardening. She's not manipulating anyone. She's trying to help. And frankly, you should be grateful, someone is actually thinking clearly about how to use this money. You're acting like a hoarder. A hoarder. The word landed like a weight in my chest. My hands clenched in my lap. Tom seemed to realize too late how far he'd gone. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly, almost pleading. I just meant you're keeping it all to yourself. That's not what families do. Something inside me snapped and hardened into steel. This isn't about family, I said, my voice low and steady. This is about greed. About control. About the fact that ever since my dad died, you stopped seeing me as your wife and started seeing me as a wallet. Tom scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound, and stormed out of the room. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. I sank onto the edge of the bed, heart hammering in my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry. Not for my father but for myself. For the life I thought I had, and the truth I finally understood. My marriage was over. I just hadn't signed the paperwork yet. The following week, I began quietly preparing. I met with a financial advisor, then a second lawyer, someone specialized in asset protection and high net worth divorces. I began transferring funds into my personal account in careful, legally documented steps, making sure every move was airtight. But I didn't stop there. Following the lawyer's advice, I upgraded the security system, installed cameras at every entrance, and hired a private investigator to look into Diane's financial history discreetly. The findings were exactly what I'd suspected: mounting credit card debt, failed ventures, and a recent inquiry into starting a luxury skincare line with no capital. No wonder she had her claws in the inheritance. Meanwhile, Tom's behavior shifted in ways that were almost comically calculated. He became distant, then suddenly affectionate. One night, he arrived with a bouquet of flowers. Another evening, he cooked dinner, a rare feat since he hadn't lifted a spatula in over a year. I've been thinking, he said as we sat across from each other at the table. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot with everything. It's been a hard time. Losing your dad, dealing with the inheritance, planning our future. I watched him carefully, not touching the wine he poured. So I asked, voice measured. What are you saying? He smiled, the same charming, manipulative smile that had once drawn me in, and leaned back. Let's just start fresh. Forget the money talk. Let's go on a trip. You and me. Somewhere nice. And in that moment, I realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't reconciliation. This was strategy. Another move in the game that had been playing out since my father died. It was strategy. He thought if he got me relaxed, distracted, even happy for a moment, I'd let my guard down. He believed he could charm his way back into control. But it was too late for that. I think I'll pass on the trip, I said, smiling politely. I've got too much going on at work. He didn't argue. But the glint in his eye told me he hadn't given up. The next morning, I noticed something was off. My laptop had been moved, barely, just an inch or two. The lid was slightly ajar. I always closed it. My stomach sank. I checked the login activity. Sure enough, 2 failed attempts to enter my password. The camera light had flickered in the dead of night. Tom denied it immediately. Of course not. Must have been a glitch, he said, shrugging as if it were no big deal. I didn't respond. I changed my passwords again, then followed my lawyer's advice: gather evidence. Document everything. And I did. Every conversation. Every suspicious move. Every manipulation, every guilt trip aimed at pressuring me to hand over a cent of my inheritance. I recorded it all. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just walk away. I'd walk away armed with proof. And if Tom thought he could play me for a fool, he was about to learn exactly who he had married. 3 days after the laptop incident, Tom stopped pretending. The mask came off entirely. No more flowers. No more fake apologies. No more charm or sweet guilt. Instead, he hovered, watching, waiting, tense and silent, as if he knew something was slipping through his fingers and had no idea how to stop it. Diane, on the other hand, grew bolder by the day. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, barefoot, her robe slightly open, sipping my coffee as though she owned the place. She had let herself in using the emergency key Tom claimed he'd given to the dog walker. "Emma," she cooed, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "We need to talk." I stopped in my tracks, staring at her. "You need to leave. Now." She didn't move. "I just want to make sure you're not doing anything impulsive," she said, leaning back, casual and predatory. "You're under a lot of stress. I'd hate for you to make a financial mistake just because you're grieving." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the silent kitchen. "A mistake? You mean something like not handing over millions of dollars to a woman who hasn't worked in a decade and calls me greedy behind my back?" Her eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. "Careful, Emma. It's not wise to make enemies in your own home." I stared at her, unflinching. She might think this was her house now, that she could intimidate me. But I wasn't the same woman who had let grief blind her, nor was I the naive bride who had trusted her husband without question. The game had changed, and now, I was playing to win. I leaned in slightly, my voice low and controlled. "This house isn't yours. And neither is the money. Now get out before I call the police." Diane stood slowly, her glare sharp as knives. "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "But women like you. You crack sooner or later." I held her gaze until she finally stormed out. When the door slammed behind her, I locked it and exhaled deeply. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "I want to move forward." We began preparing the divorce filing. My lawyer had advised strategy, quiet, clean, and controlled. I was ready. I had already moved half of the inheritance into a trust, untouchable in any divorce proceedings thanks to my father's foresight and the way he structured the assets. The other half remained in my personal account, technically still joint property, unless I acted quickly. That night, I told Tom I wanted to meet at a cafe the next morning. Neutral ground. Public. Controlled. He looked suspicious but agreed. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a full view of the entrance. In my bag were the divorce papers and a flash drive containing everything: audio recordings, screenshots, even video footage of Diane rifling through my office. Tom arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a forced smile. "Hey, Em," he said casually. "What's this about?" I didn't waste a second. I pulled out the envelope and slid it across the table toward him. "What's this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Divorce papers." My tone was calm, measured. His face twitched. He didn't touch the envelope. "Is this a joke?" "No. This is me saying I'm done." He let out a cold, humorless laugh. "You're serious? Over money?" "No," I said, voice steady. "Over disrespect. Over betrayal. Over you treating my father's death like your golden ticket." His smile faltered. "I supported you, Emma, for years. I was there when your mom died. I stood by you. And now that you're rich, you just want to throw me away." "No," I said firmly. "You threw yourself away. The moment you decided your mother deserved more than your wife." He slammed his hand onto the table. A few heads turned. "You think you're smart? You think you can just walk away with everything? We're married. I get half of it in the divorce. That's the law." I smiled, cold and measured. "Actually, no. The inheritance is legally separate property." For the first time, I saw the color drain from his face. The control, the entitlement, the arrogance, none of it could touch what I had secured. I was no longer the grieving widow my husband thought he could manipulate. I was ready. My lawyer confirmed it. My father had left everything to me, and Tom had no claim, not a cent, not a cent. He went pale. You're bluffing, he said, his voice tight. I slid the flash drive across the table. Every conversation. Every lie. Every attempt to manipulate me. Documented. Time-stamped. Clear as day. If you push me, I said calmly, I'll make sure the judge sees all of it. He stared at the drive like it was poison, like holding it would burn him. I'm offering you a fair settlement, I continued. You take what we legally built together, nothing more, or you can fight me in court and walk away with less. Tom leaned back in his chair, eyes hollow. You really think you're going to win? I already have, I said, the edge in my voice quiet but lethal. He didn't respond. He simply stood, grabbed the envelope, and left. That night, I changed the locks again. I sent Diane a cease and desist letter through my attorney. I blocked them both from every account, every contact, every connection. There was no turning back. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Deeply. Peacefully. The line had been drawn. Retribution would follow, but I allowed myself a small, precious victory. The morning after handing Tom the divorce papers, the silence in my house was deafening and beautiful. No heavy footsteps in the hallway. No lingering perfume from Diane. No fake smiles, no manipulative charm. Just peace. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, sunlight streaming through the windows, and for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt it. I wasn't just surviving. I was breathing again. But peace, I knew, would not last. 3 days later, the message came. My lawyer's words hit like a hammer. Tom had filed a response to the divorce petition, and he was demanding spousal support. According to his claim, I had accumulated wealth during our marriage, and because he had supposedly supported my emotional well-being, he was entitled to compensation. My blood boiled. Supported my emotional well-being. After everything, after every lie, every betrayal, every moment he and his mother had tried to claw what was mine, he had the audacity to frame it as a moral debt owed to him. I set my cup down and clenched my fists. The fight wasn't over. But now, I knew exactly what I had to do. And this time, I wouldn't just defend what was mine, I would make sure they paid for every ounce of deceit. The same man who had tried to strong-arm me into giving half of my inheritance to his mother. The same man who barely lifted a finger while I was grieving. Pathetic. Desperate. Still, I didn't panic. I had prepared for this moment. We responded with every piece of evidence we had, his invasion of my privacy, the attempted password hacks, his mother's uninvited visits, recordings of him belittling my grief, and perhaps most damning of all, the footage of Diane rifling through my office. My lawyer submitted it all. And then the harassment began. Blocked numbers. Random email accounts. Voicemails from names I didn't recognize, but I knew the sender. Tom. Diane. Or both. One voicemail seethed, Emma, you're ruining everything. This isn't how family treats each other. Call me back. Another simply warned, you'll regret this. But I didn't. I kept living. I went to work. I saw friends. I started therapy. I walked my dog in the mornings, hit the gym, sat in cafes with a book. The simple, ordinary moments felt revolutionary, small acts of freedom reclaiming my life. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that Tom had moved back in with Diane, who had just defaulted on a credit card. They were consulting with a shady financial advisor, attempting to flip houses with no capital. Tom had quit his job a week after my father's death, assuming he'd be living off my inheritance. Now he had no job, no house, no car. The vehicle he drove was registered under my father's company, and I had it repossessed legally. Everything he had counted on was unraveling. Then came the final blow. My lawyer called, voice tinged with satisfaction. The judge has reviewed all the evidence and rejected Tom's spousal support claim entirely. Not only is he getting zero of your inheritance, but the court also views his behavior as manipulative and predatory. If he continues to harass you, we could even pursue a restraining order. I smiled. Let's keep that in our back pocket, I thought. But I didn't need it. Tom was already breaking. One night, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Emma, he said, voice shaky, almost unrecognizable. Please, just hear me out. I didn't say anything. I messed up. I see that now. I let my mom get in my head. I got greedy, but I miss you. I miss us. I waited for the punchline, the manipulative twist I knew was coming. You can't do this to me, he finally said, his voice rising with desperation. I gave you years of my life, and now you're leaving me with nothing. And in that instant, I knew the truth. Tom had never loved me. He had loved the idea of what I could give him: status, security, access. And when he realized I couldn't be controlled, he panicked. You gave me nothing, I said calmly. And I owe you even less. I hung up. Blocked the number. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Clean. Efficient. My legal team had protected everything: my assets, my company shares, the apartment my father had gifted me. Tom walked away with what was legally his, a few thousand in savings, and whatever dignity he hadn't already spent. As expected, Diane tried to sue me for emotional distress. It was thrown out immediately. With the dust settling, I donated a portion of my inheritance to a cancer foundation in my father's name. It felt right. A full circle moment. Because this story wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about release. And now I was free. It's been 7 months since that divorce decree. 7 months since I walked out of the courthouse with a quiet, triumphant smile that said, I'm done handing my peace to people who don't know how to value it. The house still belonged to me, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Every room echoed with slammed doors, Diane's sharp voice, and the memory of the man I once thought I'd grow old with. So I sold it. Not out of spite. Not out of necessity. I sold it to let go. My father's downtown apartment, the one he had gifted me years ago but I had never moved into, was waiting. I renovated it with warm colors, open windows, and soft, welcoming spaces. It felt like a fresh chapter. It felt like mine. The first night I slept there, alone but safe, I lit a candle and sat by the window. I thought about my father and how proud he would have been. Not of the money, not of the legal battle, but of the fight I carried within me. For the first time in years I felt it: peace, freedom, and the quiet satisfaction of finally being myself again. He always told me, Emma, power isn't in how loud you are. It's in how quietly you refuse to be used. And he was right. For a while after the divorce, I braced myself for a twist, for Tom to come back with another scheme, or Diane to send a threatening letter through some third-rate lawyer. But nothing came. Just silence. Eventually, through mutual acquaintances, I learned the full extent of their downfall. Tom had filed for bankruptcy. Diane was renting a basement apartment and had closed all her social media accounts. Their little empire of entitlement had crumbled under its own weight. And me? I was rebuilding. Not from scratch, from truth. I returned to work with new clarity. Part of my inheritance funded a scholarship in my father's name for first-generation medical students committed to serving underserved communities. My dad had always believed in giving back, and now, even in death, he still could. I also began mentoring young women in business and leadership. So many had been through what I had: financial abuse disguised as support, manipulation disguised as love. They didn't need saving. They just needed to be reminded that they had a choice. It's funny. I thought revenge would taste sweet. It didn't. What tasted sweet was waking up without anxiety. Checking my phone without dread. Sitting in silence and feeling peace instead of tension. What tasted sweet was looking in the mirror and seeing myself again, not the version Tom had tried to mold, not the version Diane had tried to belittle, but the me my father had raised. The me I had almost forgotten. One afternoon, I found an old letter tucked inside one of my father's books. In his handwriting, dated 3 years before his death, it read, Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around anymore. I want you to remember something important. Money reveals people. It doesn't change them, it only amplifies what's already inside. Don't ever let someone make you feel guilty for having what they feel entitled to. Share when it's love. Protect when it's pressure. And if someone ever makes you choose between peace and pleasing them, choose peace every time. I sat with that letter for a long time and cried. Not from pain but relief. Even in his absence, my father had given me exactly what I needed: a compass, a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't wrong, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. Now, when people ask me about the divorce, I don't talk about the money, the manipulation, or the betrayal. I tell them this. Love without respect is possession. Family without boundaries is chaos. Surviving isn't enough, sometimes, you need to outgrow what tried to break you. I didn't just survive my marriage. I outgrew it. And the greatest revenge I ever took. Healing without needing them to see it. So here I am. Still standing. Still smiling. Still soft. But no longer silent.